Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book review. Today, I'm going to be covering this book titled, Suddenly the Cider Didn't Taste So Good. It's written by a guy with a generic name, John Ford. The subtitle is Adventures of a Game Warden in Maine. The back cover says, retired Maine game warden John Ford has seen it all. He's been shot at by desperate prison escapees, been outwitted by wily trappers, and rescued scores of animals. As a tenacious warden, he always was willing to spend the time needed to nab violators of the state's fish and game laws. At the same time, he wasn't a heartless, go-by-the-book enforcer. He usually had a good quip ready when he slipped the handcuffs on a violator, and he wasn't above accepting a lesson learned as sufficient penalty for breaking the law. Ford is also a gifted storyteller, and he writes of his adventures in Suddenly the Cider Didn't Taste So Good, a collection of true tales, some serious, some humorous, and all heartwarming. This book I bought used, I think, at Coas. It says copyright 2012, so it's a relatively new book. The dedication says, I dedicate this book to all of the wardens, past and present, and to their families for the many sacrifices made while serving the sportsmen of Maine. 15 have made the ultimate sacrifice doing a job they loved, lest we never forget them. And I offer a special dedication to retired Maine game warden Vernon Walker and my mother Ethelind Walker. It was their inspiration and encouragement that allowed my dream of one day becoming a game warden to become a reality. I am forever indebted to their memory. This book reads at times like a good old boys kind of story. Maine isn't an incredibly high population state, and a lot of the people that he ends up arresting or giving tickets to, they're people from the community. He knows them, or he knows their cousin, or he knows someone related to them. And what that does for him is that he ends up trying to be friendly to his community, but he knows that they also secretly, or not so secretly, despise him. There's, 20 or so different stories in the table of contents. 30? There's a lot. The book is only about 215 pages long, and there's one story in it that is the last story that is really sums up the dichotomy. John Ford is an officer. He's law enforcement, and he knows the people, and he knows his community, and he tries to get along well with them. But he's always at times in a uncomfortable peace with the people. He's the butt of the joke when they can make him the butt of the joke. And the final chapter, Suddenly the Cider Didn't Taste So Good, really summarizes it pretty well. Every fall, my friend Harold hosted a contingent of his Connecticut buddies for a deer hunt around Unity Pond. The annual event was pretty typical for a Maine sporting getaway. Big nightly meals followed by a lot of storytelling and more than a fair share of drinking and card playing, along with the many other activities a group of hunters find for entertainment while far away from home, including the occasional foray into the woods in search of a trophy deer. Although I considered Harold a good friend, I also recognized that he wasn't the most law-abiding citizen I'd ever met, especially when he teamed up with his non-resident cronies. We'd developed a mutual understanding. He and his pals realized I had a job to do and would show no partiality in performing my duties if they should happen to get out of line. Once that was understood, we got along fine. Earlier in the week, I'd located one of Harold's tree stands neatly tucked away in his favorite hunting spot in South Unity. All around this tree stand were piles of apples, an obvious attempt to lure a big buck. Comically, there wasn't an apple tree within 40 miles of this place. Baiting deer is highly illegal, but it would be impossible to prove that Harold had done the dirty deed without solid evidence. I decided to use an old trick of the trade passed along by fellow wardens whenever they found bait placed near a tree stand. They urinated on it. The human scent would deter deer from coming near the forbidden fruits. I'd enjoyed several cups of coffee during the day, so I didn't have any problem covering Harold's many piles of apples. Then I firmly attached one of my business cards with a small note written on it to the seat of Harold's tree stand. Harold, I've been here once and I'll be back, I signed it. I'll be watching you from afar. John. There's a bit of a anecdote within there before it gets to a party by Harold. And Harold insisted that he have a drink with the gang. He says, not wanting to be a prude, I reluctantly took a large glass of Harold's homemade hard cider. It was the lesser of the evils, I figured, compared to the many bottles of hard liquor lined up on the bar. I joined the party, honestly suspecting that any of those present could become future customers in my line of work. But still, they had become friends and were fun to be around. It continues for a bit, and he says, Harold, I hollered, making sure everyone in the camp could hear me. What? He replied. Harold, you know all those apples you dumped around that tree stand of yours in South Unity? He stuttered a bit before responding. What makes you think I dumped any apples there? Especially with all of them pine trees around there, John. They could very well be pineapples. Pineapples, that's what they are, he kept muttering. He knew damned well I couldn't prove he'd been the one to put them there. Well, anyway, Harold, if I were you, I wouldn't waste a lot of my precious time sitting in your tree stand waiting for a big buck to show up. I peed all over those apples, and there won't be a deer within 100 miles come to feed off them. His cronies burst into a fit of laughter that shook the entire camp. Harold looked shocked. Then, ever so dryly, he responded, John, I hate to be the one to have to tell you this, but I gathered up every one of those apples a short time before hunting season started. And I want you to know, that cider you're drinking? Well, guess where the apples came from. Suddenly, the glass of hard cider didn't taste quite so good. By now, the crew in the camp was rolling on the floor in total hysteria, and rather than laughing at Harold's expense, they were laughing at mine. And to think, it all came about because I'd lost my damned old hat in a woods road somewhere. I placed my glass on the nearest table and moseyed up to the bar, where a smiling fellow poured me a healthy shot of bourbon. There's a lot of stories in here of a manhunt, of a saved owl and a saved fox that he would raise. There's stories in here about all manner of animals, of a helicopter or a plane, I think it was a plane piloting accident, going after murderers and going after escaped criminals and bluffing escaped criminals, and it's a fascinating read. I know in previous videos I've mentioned that I love reading books about park rangers and about wilderness law enforcement, and this is right in that alley. What interested me about it was that the content was so similar in theme and in tone to those found in Park Ranger or in Nature Noir. If you have read either of those books and enjoyed them, you're going to enjoy this. Suddenly, the cider didn't taste so good. Adventures of a Game Warden in Maine is a good book, a very human story, and it's a lot of short stories, easily digestible. You can read 1 or 2 per day, 5-10 pages tops, and then, consume this book over several weeks if you have just a bit of time per day. Or you could read it all at once and you have a bunch of short stories interspersed together. Either way you read this, there's a lot of fun content in here. If you like this kind of thing, I'd encourage you to buy this book. And if you already have it, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book review.